Hey, what's up? I'm Jay, and this is how I made Cyberpunk Girl. So first off, just want to thank you guys for the reception. This one really hit hard with people, it seems, so I'm really glad that you guys like how she came out. Kind of funny if we jump over here to the video. When I posted it up, I said in the comment, I was like, hey, if we get 500 likes, we'll make the making of video, which is this video that we're making right now. And we got to 8.5 thousand likes so far. So so I gotta set higher goals, is what we're learning. But yeah, so this video is gonna be a little bit longer form. We're gonna get nerdy. We're gonna talk about some details. And my goals of this video was to address the most commonly asked questions by you guys. So I jotted down the most commonly asked questions, and then we're gonna tackle them one by one in this video, kind of give an overview, and then we'll dive into some of the big ticket items. A couple common questions that make sense for me to answer right off the top are the song. A lot of people ask what song it is. It's from Epidemic Sound and it's called Expanding by Elliptic. I don't know if it's on, Spotify or anything, but I use Epidemic Sound for my videos. Another commonly asked question is how long did this project take? And it took me around 30 hours of work time, probably a little bit more. And then obviously there's rendering and stuff, but I'm not in the chair when it's doing that. So I'll say around 30 hours. My goal with this project was to make a fan art, kind of a tribute to the game Cyberpunk 2077. Really their aesthetic, which is dope. And I just love the Cyberpunk aesthetic in general, that genre. And I also have been wanting to do a girl with kind of an FU attitude for a while. So I just kind of merged those ideas together to make this character. And then I released it the day that Cyberpunk, the game, came out. Also, as a dev, I do feel for those guys. So I hope they get to rectify that game soon and people can start playing it again. So that's it. Without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at how I made Cyberpunk Girl. All right, I thought I would start out by taking a look at my reference board. So I build these for every project. They also kind of, get bigger and bigger as time goes on. You can see how I have these little islands that kind of radiate out. And, everyone builds their reference boards their own way. It's pretty crazy, but it's like a mind map or something. But I thought it'd be interesting to see, here's the character that I was taking a spin on. And then you can see like what I'm mixing in here. Here's like face reference. Here's my dumb face doing the pose. And you can see like I'm doing this like stanky face. This is one of my key references. I got this from ArtStation, actually, a reference pack, photo reference pack for doing studies. And then we have details and all that stuff. So you can see tattoos and jewelry. These glasses, which I thought I was going to do, these are some badass glasses, I thought. But I ended up opting not to do it because I didn't want to cover up the eyes. I thought so much stuff was going on already with the eyes that I didn't want to cover it up. So you can see some color palette stuff, general vibe. I love this photo by Harris Newcomb. So, I'm just kind of, this is a glimpse into some references, right, that I'm using. The hair. Here's a friend of mine that has like some cool gradients and not like ton of curly hair and flyaways and stuff. I got a lot of comments that my character looked like Natalie Dormer, I think her name is. And you can see she's in the reference. What do you know? So that's it. Let's jump over to Zbrush and check out how I started the project. All right, so starting off, I'm starting my project like I start all my projects with a base mesh. This is the base mesh that I've made. I've been asked if it's available anywhere, and it's not. I've just been trying to make it as perfect as possible. So I've been refining it myself for the last several projects, and it's what I use for everything that I do. And if I do release it, I'll let you guys know. But you definitely don't need this particular base mesh. You could use, Zbrush comes with some, it's just to get up and running. I just like, particular things. So I'm using my own. It's important for me to get eyes in early and while I'm working on faces because eyes influence, the eyelids and then the eyebrows. And so there's kind of a chain reaction. I knew there was going to be kind of a stank face on this one. I knew she'd be looking downwards, which is going to affect the eyelids. So it's just general practice. I'm always putting in the eyes as quick as possible. And then I get right started on the facial expression. So you'll see like I start by making polygroups so I can do quick selections. I delete all the polygons that I don't need because I know this is going to be a bust. Actually, I gave myself a lot more room than the final render ended up being, but I just wanted to give myself some safety net in case I wanted to back the camera up. And then I started right in on the facial expression. I started opening the mouth. I started pushing the face muscles around to get the stank face. I knew where I was headed, so I just started right in on it. And you can see too that I already broke symmetry. So just right off the jump, getting right into it. So this is another thing that I've been asked. You can see I actually model it in pose. So I'm going for a particular image the whole way through. This isn't like I'm making a production ready character and then building a rig and then creating the pose that way so she can animate and stuff like that. This is very much just made all in this pose. So I keep it low for a while and then I subdivided it up to 4. You'll see later we're going to do the HD geometry workflow. So I know I'm going to cap it at 4. So I just divided it right up to 4 so I can start pushing and pulling things around and knowing like what my limitations are in terms of the subdivisions. Starting to add like finer lines, in the corner of the lip curl and around the nose, drawing a mask to make the cheek come out. So I'm starting to build slowly, but I'm starting to work in that facial pose and get the compression. The jacket itself, pretty easy, just drawing a mask on the torso, extracting that, and then I remesh it. So the goal here is just to make a general jacket shape with neutral enough topology for me to sculpt it however I want. So you'll see I push and pull it, and then I Z-remesh it several times, smooth it, until I get a nice neutral topology that's all quadded out, and it looks kind of like a jacket. Then for the collar, I just use Z-modeler, extruded out that collar. It's pretty cool that now edge extrude actually works as you would want, so that's kind of an awesome update in the later versions of ZBrush, so I can do things like this. And then the collar around the neck, I just started with a cylinder, and then I deleted everything I didn't need. I use the slice brush to just get the contour around the coat. And then now we have a simple collar geometry. Extruded it for thickness. And then really quick, just showing I did do these are really only in the background of the final image, but I did the little, tech cylinder things that go on her shoulder. That's part of the Cyberpunk design. So I just wanted to make sure I got it in there. All right, so after some quick modeling, putting it on place now, duplicating it. I just made 1 and then I got 8 out of it, so that's pretty good. Back on the collar, using damn standard now, putting in the stitch. You can see how things start off pretty sketchy, but just gets me to know where things go and then I can just refine. So I'm just outlining it, and I'm also leaning into the whole organic nature of it. That's why I like organic creatures and leather and clothes and stuff, because you don't have to be too precious. You can be a little loose. This is that inset that the cords go in. I make the cords at the end, but I knew this was going to have to be there. And then it's already jotting down some wrinkles. So another question I had is how I did the cloth and wrinkles. So we'll see a little bit of that, but it's just straight up sculpting. I'm trying to be generally fast with these things. So I'm just doing things I know how to do. So I know there's some brushes that can do cloth-like things in ZBrush, but I've done some limited testing, and to get, anything out that I like, I'd have to just practice a lot more. So right now, just straight up sculpting it, using that little chisel alpha and going to town, making some wrinkles, trying to make sense of it a little bit. But I did get pretty willy-nilly here with the collar, but going over the stitch, to make it look like it's dimpling, the stitches is dimpling the leather, and then doing some bigger wrinkles, smaller wrinkles. So mixing it up, just general cloth sculpting for me, nothing too crazy and, nothing too specific. I just know it's not going to be the focal point of the image. So I just need it to look organic. So same thing with the coat. Starting out with the damn standard, drawing the seams, which helps me pillow the shapes, and then getting to carve out where these cylinders go. And this gives me kind of rhyme or reason, like where wrinkles will go, So I'm starting with the seams and where things transition, and then I know I can just kind of make the material look like it's bunching up in between those landmarks to hopefully sell the shape of the wrinkles. Here we go, just making some little zigzaggy patterns. Again, I know it's not the focal point, so and I'm trying to keep it fast. So it's like the kind of material it is. It's gonna have generally like soft wrinkles. So I'm just making sure that the surface doesn't look perfect, and that's really it. So again, just straight up sculpting, and good enough. All right, so you can see my collar. I kept all the subdivision levels so I can go all the way down. So I duplicated it, went all the way down, and now I'm going to turn this into the collar light. It's another question I got a few times. So we're gonna take a look at using ZModeler to make that kind of collar light shape. Nothing too crazy, just might be good to see it. ZModeler is something I think isn't used too much, but I've just gotten used to it over the years because it's so convenient not leaving ZBrush. So doing like general modeling tasks, I use it. So that whole like rigmarole was just to get this loop, this poly loop that fits inside of the collar. And then we'll start adding edges, collapsing edges and stuff to make that little pattern for the light. All right, so inserting an edge loop, beveling it and adding 2 rows now so I'm not losing that middle one. So there we go. Now we got these 2 rows perfectly in the middle. Now I'm just adding and deleting edges. So I'm essentially scooching them where they need to be. Then collapsing the ones I don't need. So we're already getting there, you see. Now I'm moving this down. By drawing transpose from vert to vert too, I'm making sure that it's translating along the axis here. So just nudging it. So we're getting there already. And now that I have this shape, I can insert edge loops. Actually, I just need 1. Yeah, there we go. 1. There we go. And then if I inset that one, cleaning this up, welding, deleting edges, insetting again. It's getting super junky, but that's okay. Again, I like just staying in ZBrush and being a little bit, organic. So it's also just, maybe it's just laziness, but but here you go. So now we're cooking, getting there. All right, now we can just bevel this so I can remove the gap in between, and then we're gonna have these rows. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. I gotta delete this one, or bevel and get the tip here. And you can see how the bevel was being weird, so I just inserted loops. This is what I do in ZModeler a lot. Like I can't get exactly what I want one way, so I just do some basic thing another way. But there you go. Now we got all these loops that do this pattern, and it fits on the inside of the collar. And then pretty easy, just extruding and creasing the edges, and then it holds its shape and rounds it. And that's really it for this shape. I don't know if you can tell, so the hair ends up blocking it, but there's an error. See, there's actually a mistake in this collar light that I modeled it, and the other side, like I didn't mirror it at the right time or whatever, and it created this gap. So like you see, I'm only working on this side, and then when I'm done, it's different over there. So I could have easily just done a mirror and weld and it would have been fine, but I kind of liked the other shape, even though it was by accident. And I thought, I'll just leave it asymmetrical because it looked like a complex techie shape. But you can end up seeing it in the render. You see, you can see it now. I just kind of liked it. So I kept it. I always figured if I didn't like it in the final image, I could always mirror this, but didn't really play a role. But I thought it was kind of a happy accident. All right, so now rotating the eye, refining the shape a little bit of the face. Making progress in the face. So I'm rotating these eyes down. I'm actually kind of faking the final camera position that I'm thinking. That's slightly downward looking up. So I'm rotating the eyes and then following suit with the eyelids. Now I'm moving the nose, so I'm actually turning it off axis. I'm trying to sell that as the skin moves up in this pose, that it's pulling parts of the facial feature with it to really get this compression. You can see I sketched in the snarl already with damp standard, and then just refining this area, like pushing, pulling, adding volume. All right, so isolating the lips, starting to draw more shapes in here. This is damp standard again, and just kind of going with the flow. I've got some reference, a couple different facial features that are close, or facial poses that are close, and so kind of just going off different shapes that I like in lips that are scrunching, and then going back over it. You can see too, I kind of jump in right at the parts that I feel are the most important. Like I need to nail this corner. The rest of the parts kind of follow suit, but the snarl right here that I'm working on, the cheek coming up, the eye compressing. So I'm really just spending the most time up front on the most important areas and what I would think would become the focal point. And then everything else, doesn't need as much time essentially, because you're just trying to tackle the big ones. It's also kind of a strategy of just getting the monsters out of the way. You know what I mean? Like not putting off what is, I don't know if the scariest part is the right way to say it, but the most daunting or the most important parts, just not putting it off, not trying to procrastinate on the things that need to get done and I'm not sure how to do it. I'd rather just jump in, try to tackle the hardest things first. So still pretty much all damn standard in clay tubes. And obviously move brush and then some standard brush. So those are the go-to brushes. And those brushes I all have on hotkeys because I'm switching around so much. All right, looking to be in a pretty good spot. Getting ready here to start adding details. All right, isolating the lips, starting to add little high frequency details here. This is my fine line brush. And I'm just kind of sketching it in a way. Getting the wrinkles, getting the flow and the direction right. And then I can always go over them again. And, what I don't end up making deeper just becomes a really fine wrinkle, which is fine. That's part of skin, So that's cool with me. All right, so adding some more of those fine lines now with the fine line brush to the lips. You can see it's starting to come alive now, especially when I'm starting to like crisscross them. And this is something that I'm going to be refining. Like the lips aren't done, but I just wanted to start getting in there. It's kind of a good spot for me to like start the high frequency detail too. Before things get a little too out of control. The lips are going to be another focal point, so figured might as well dive in there, and that'll help her look more natural too. You can see I even have that subtle expression on the chin, the different chin muscles there. So that's something I sketched in early too. The way that the wrinkle breaks along the cheek. So like the expression's already in a pretty good spot because I tackled it first. So we're already, starting to be able to add that high frequency detail on top to start to bring it to life. So we're looking pretty good. And this is, this could be meditative. Depends. Some people don't like doing this, but I like doing this, when it goes well. Obviously, it can be frustrating to spend like an hour doing tedious work and then you have to throw it out. But if I'm just jamming and adding detail and going with the flow, and then the kind of illusion of it looking more believable happens, that's what's satisfying to me. So it's why I like doing the things by hand. It gives me the most control and also the most satisfaction of trying to turn my sculpts into more believable characters. Okay, now we're going to get ready, get these models prepped. So I'm showing you here that I'm using the unwrap in Zbrush. So I'm actually even doing it to the head right now because I want the head and the torso to all just be one map just to save time, make it easier. So I'm actually just nuking the UVs I had on it before. And you can see now it does a pretty good job. Jumping down to the flatten mode and then rescaling it because the head needs to be more important. So I'm just going to save out an 8K map. And then and there you go. And you can see I'm going to make the torso real small. But it doesn't matter because it's not as important. So yeah, just showing you here. So I actually UV mapped the torso, the collar, the jacket. I mean, everything that needed UVs. I just unwrapped it in here. All right, so now I just divided my head several times in the HD. So sub D4 is as high as I went in the traditional subdivisions, and then I went up the rest of the way in HD Geo because I'm gonna do the fine detailing in the HD mode and then export a 32-bit displacement map. That's gonna be my workflow so I can render it in Arnold and keep all those crispy deets. So now I'm just refining it, and then we're gonna dive into doing some high frequency detail. So the detail on this face and all the characters that I've been making kind of in recent history, I've been making detail assets, brushes and textures that I've used, and we're gonna see it right here. And I actually just recently published those. I bundled all the little assets that I used to build this kind of high frequency detail on my characters. And now you can use them too in your own project. So if that's something that you're interested in, I put the link in the description below. All right, so now we're jumping into HD geometry. So you do that by mousing over your mesh and hitting A, in case you didn't know. So that's what's gonna happen. You're gonna see the mesh get, kind of weirdly masked. This means we're in HD. So now I'm loading up one of my skin texture maps that I made into the surface noise as an alpha and projecting it. Now this does it from the camera angle once you drop it into HD. So I'm going to have to do this a few times, but this is what I do to lay down a lot of pores at once. So I'm just dialing in the size and the depth and I stored a morph target before I commit this to the geometry. So then I can wash it out and then I can control it. I just hit switch on the morph target, so that kind of takes it back to when I stored it. And now the morph brush adds it back. So this way I can, slowly build up the pores to the depth that I want and only in the places that I want. And since this only works from this camera view, I have to do it on the other camera view. All right, so once my pore texture is done the bulk of the work, I start to button up everything else by hand. This is a pore group brush, and then I've got these individual pore brushes. So this is how I do the skin detail on my characters. I do it by hand using assets that I built up, which I also made by hand. Here I am reinforcing the pores that are scrunching in the expression, as she compresses her skin, trying to get the wrinkles in between the pores as they squash. So yeah, if you want to know more about skin detailing, part of the skin detail kit that I just put up has some videos that go a little bit more in depth on my workflow and how I use it with Arnold and exporting them. All right, really quick, wanted to mention how I did the diamonds because I thought it was kind of interesting. It's a Zbrush workflow too, again. So I just extracted these shapes off the teeth that I already had and Z-remeshed them and then used Z-modeler to clean them up. And then I made the diamond. So I started with a cylinder and then I extruded this out, started using Z-modeler again, just to add some edges. And I looked up a diamond cut, online. So I'm just putting edges where those chisels are. And I'm using radial symmetry to save some time. Again, Z-modeler, not perfect. So I'm having to do some tricky stuff, some welds and cuts and all that stuff to make it work. But nonetheless, we get there. We get a cylinder that's diced up as the edges are in the cut of a diamond. Then I can just move it up. And then I'm going to extrude the edge down and then vary that up like the diamond. Then I can extrude the bottom to a point. And here we go, cooking with a diamond. So my goal here is to make this diamond model. And then I'm going to add it to this insert mesh brush. And then I'm going to use Z-modeler again, which lets you attach it as a nano mesh. And so I'm going to attach it as a nano mesh to the teeth geo that we made in the beginning. And there we go. We got some diamonds. All right, so here's this test render. So I actually took some time. I built up this in Maya, did a render with the displacement map, and then I did a paint over so that I could kind of get a sense, am I headed in the right direction? Do I have what I need? It's kind of a sanity check. And then I went to build the real scene. All right, so I imported my models, and then I imported an HDRI as an Arnold environment light to, just to light up the scene. Doing a quick render now, have it on the basic settings, like the default render settings. I'm doing a relatively low resolution so I can start setting things up fast. Dialing the camera in, dialing the light direction. I'm actually assigning an Arnold material and making it emissive so I can get the collar light, which I knew was going to be an important part of the composition. You can see it's actually orange now. I changed that later. I'm importing my eye assets that I've made, again by hand, and again something that I'm reusing to save time. And so here I am positioning the light and the intensity. All this stuff is going to change slightly a bunch of times. But right now I'm just dialing in the main idea. All right, so starting to assign more materials. Just assigned a standard surface to the skin. Use the skin preset. Then we're going into the hypershade and graphing that. Going to the displacement. And then I'm attaching the texture that I exported from Zbrush, that 32-bit high-res displacement. And then I'm going into the object settings, turning on the Cat-Clark subdivisions and the auto bump. So I'm going over this fast. We can go more in depth in this later, but this is setting up the displacement map workflow in Arnold. So now I'm getting up and ongoing with that. Starting to change some of the settings. Also using a preset for diamonds that's also in Arnold. So quickly setting up all the elements that I need to build up my scene, and this is what the render looks like so far. All right, so showing you two of the early stages of what became the neon light setup. So early on, I knew that I wanted the render to have very colorful lights. And I also knew that I wanted the yellow background, the iconic yellow background from the Cyberpunk 2077 images. So this took the most iteration, the neon setup. Eventually, I just made keyframes of each camera angle and setup, but just showing you the beginning stages of what became neon. So the eyes, my eye color is controlled with a ramp because of the way it's UV mapped. So I'm actually using a ramp now and plugging it into a mission and giving it that pink color so that it glows. And then later I make this a little bit more complicated too. I'll add, detail in my ramp, and then I actually use a different ramp to subtract that detail to add these little techie shapes out of it. So the skin, not only am I using the displacement map, I'm also using an AI noise here, a cell noise. And you can see, well, it's big, so I'm isolating it so I can work on it. So it's this like organic pattern. I think it's called alligator. Yeah, it's called alligator. So it's this organic cellular pattern. And what I'm doing is I'm playing with the settings here, and I'm going to make this extremely small. And then I'm going to mix those displacements. So all my hand sculpted detail, and then this super high frequency organic noise essentially, so that it breaks up the light. And it actually, it's so small, it even adds a little bit of roughness. And then it just holds up extremely close. So this is like a cellular, skin pattern that I'm just putting over the entire skin. So this is part of my setup in the skin shading. And this, I think, gives it that extra hyper real quality, and something that I thought I would put in here. I got a lot of questions also on the skin shading. So this is really kind of the last piece of the puzzle. You can see I'm isolating it again now so I can work on it. And then now we're seeing everything mixed together. It's a small thing that might be hard to perceive. I'm also rendering right here. I'm just showing you I did a really high quality setting so I could see it like at full res. All right, so the skin painting. This is how I did the color of the skin. I actually just poly painted it right in ZBrush. I'm using the scatter. You can actually see my brushes down there in the lower left. So I'm using like a color spray and some noisy alphas. And I'm going in between HD and non-HD. So sometimes I don't need a lot of resolution for like gradients, right? And then sometimes I do need a lot of resolution. And that's a key component in believable skin, is a detailed base color. So even though the contrast is very shallow, let's say, there's not like a big range between the darks and the lights. I think it is important though to get a sharpness on the details that you're painting, and then varying color, varying value. It's that sharpness. Like, you could think of freckles as a good example, but I'm doing that over and over again at various like opacity levels, so to create kind of a noise in the base color. And that, once it's rendered with a ray trace render and it's doing subsurface, it's not exactly how I would do it for a game, but it just adds that extra believability because putting in the subsurface color, it like spreads around and it just completes that illusion. So you'll see almost all my brush strokes here have this, kind of random noisy detail. And the idea is that I'm building up layers of color, value, shapes. And the fact that I'm doing it in HD, sometimes I go all the way up to full res and I'll do really, really tiny little circles and stuff, and I'll keep it sharp. Again, I think that just helps the believability to be mixing some soft detail, some sharp detail, just all kinds of variation, just very low contrast. Here I'm using the masking tools to do like a cavity mask of sorts, and then adding a little bit of darkness in there too. So here I'm doing it in the flat view now, so there's no shading. You can see what's happening here. So I'm actually picking up some of the detail that I put in the sculpt, and I'm just lightly, putting a darker color in there, which will help pop those out and help feel a little bit more believable. Another thing too, I use cross-polarized photography. Just like, I have it on my Pinterest board. I've got these skin photographs and examples and scans of real life people with no lighting whatsoever. So I use those, as reference to get some kind of idea to do detail, color, shape, and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I'm painting here, especially in this unlit mode. So I want it to still look like skin, even if it's in the unlit mode. Adding some veins around the nose, always a fun detail, just spraying. These are all the default alphas too, by the way. When I'm doing the color, I'm just putting it right on there. Now I'm actually putting in some of my pores from my skin detail kit, and I have some color too. So this is how I'm doing like blackheads. There we go. Now we got some blackheads. Starting to do some washes of purples even around the eyes, red around the nose. So paying attention to color variation and trying to add it where I can. All right, starting to refine the lip color now. Painted in a darker pink. Now using these cavity masking tools again to start to break up the color in the wrinkles and creases in the lips. In between the wrinkles, so the wrinkles are darker, but not necessarily getting too dark. It's just that I'm lightening inside like the pads of the lip. Now, another fun part is kind of adding like little freckles and tiny splotches. So that's what I'm doing here. You can see my alpha's tiny now, and then just spraying those around. The really, really tiny alpha now. So this is almost like moles or even more freckles. And, you can just spray this over and over. But you see just layering, right? Just tons of various kinds of noise, just like random patterns, splotchiness, color. And it might look a little too much in this view. But just like based on my experience, I know that this is going to look okay. Plus, another thing to keep in mind, I connect this stuff to like color correction nodes in Arnold, and which gives me like full control. So I'm never too worried. It's actually better to go too far than not far enough, because then, just with easy color correction tools, even Photoshop, you'd be able to make those connections. So exported that big map, bringing it in now as a file texture. And then these color maps get connected to the subsurface color of the material. So we can see what it looks like as a solid color. And then once the texture is connected, you can see the difference. Looks a lot more alive now. And you can see, we're not doing a full render yet. I will, just to test things out. But you can see how the like the splotchiness and everything, it doesn't seem as strong once it's attached to a subsurface material. Everything becomes a lot more subtle, and it just gives a lot more interest to the light, a lot more interest to the skin in general, and helps to look more natural and believable. Okay, so now let's jump into doing some grooming. More questions I got on the hair and stuff. So I am using XGen, which ships with the later versions of Maya. So I'm going through the quick process here. So doing a selection mask on some faces, creating a new XGen description, and then adding it to a new collection, which is going to be for her. Adding some of these guide curves. This is the method I use most, doing the traditional XGen and then using guide curves. So placing them, bending them, right now changing the thickness. So we're just breezing through this because this is just a general practice, and I'm doing that over and over. So just thought I would show you, the painting of the mask, which is the density mask. And then a little trick that I like to do is I use a little expression. Okay, running clumps now. So another thing that's common. So I'll do multiple clumps. But here I am starting to polish it a little bit already, where I'm adding a smaller density around the edges. And then I'm putting in a little expression here that makes the less dense parts thinner. So that helps me blend the hairs. So I like doing that. I pretty much do that on all my grooms. And now doing some test renders. So assigning the Arnold hair shader, which is great. By far the best hair shader I've ever used. So it's always fun to use that. And then, here I am tweaking. I got the render open. So then I do the same deal for the short hairs, which are on her head. Again, selecting the faces, adding a description, and in the guide curves. And then here we go. Then I'm going to tweak the density, the thickness, and then add clumps. I'll usually add around 3 levels of clumps. When it comes to grooming, it's a huge, huge subject. There's literally artists whose full-time job it is to groom, and they do obviously a much better job than me, but can't really cover it in a small video. It might be something I do in the future. I'm getting a lot of questions about the hair. I can tell you that it takes me a long time on this project. It might have been the most time-consuming thing would be the hair you're looking at right now, the main hairstyle. And that's just because there's a lot of different skills, and also, I'm not the best with XGen, I would say, especially making clumps. I think that's really where the skill and the craftsmanship comes in when I'm admiring other people's grooms. It has a lot to do with the characteristics and the detail in their clumps. But, just putting down curves and styling it, I can do that. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And then I'm doing a lot of back and forth, like you're seeing now, on the details inside the clumps, the noise inside. I use a lot of randomness. So because the way I'm doing it is so procedural, I'm just tweaking a lot to see what it looks like. So showing you now a little bit of how I'm doing some of the coloring. So I'm using two different methods actually. I knew I wanted a gradient, like her hair was dyed, and I knew I wanted it to be really bold color like pink. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm using curves and I'm plugging that in. And then later I actually make like a 1-to-1 color map, and then I use that to drive the color of the hair, and that gives me the different dyed clumps. So that mixed with the gradient, I actually add purple into the gradient too. Then I get this pretty complex hairstyle with all these different kind of colors, which I was really satisfied with. I'm happy how that came out. All right, next up, let's take a closer look at the way I did the makeup. One of the most common questions I got was about the makeup, particularly the eye. The eye and the lips are done in a similar way. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that and show, my process. So first up, I thought I would address, some people ask me why not just put it in the texture. So if it were doing a game character, absolutely, I would do it that way. So the method I chose to do was to ultimately the skin of her head, the shader was a layered shader. So the skin shader you saw me developing earlier is one of the layers. And then I created layers for the eye makeup. I eventually created a layer for mascara, like an eyeliner. And then I created a layer for the lips. And inside those layers are some complicated materials too. In some cases, a layered shader that's plugged into a layer shader. So it gets pretty complex eventually. But the reason why I'm doing that is because I get ultimate resolution. And then in terms of texture maps, in terms of 1-to-1 texture maps, I'm only using one, and that's the mask. And so I just painted that in Zbrush, where I want the makeup to be. And then I'm using procedurals and just Arnold shading stuff, in the hypershade to create the look. So in the case of the mascara, it's, I wanted to do this like glitter blue. I ended up opting to do something using AI flakes, which is a node in Arnold. They use it for car paint. I think that's the number one use of it. That's what I chose to do for the glitter. So eventually I end up building the look with two AI flakes, one that's more silvery, one that's more blue. I'm editing those procedural nodes to get the kind of normal variation, color variation. I found some high resolution images to base off of. So eventually I settled on keeping all the skin detail in there and just trying to make it look like it's kind of like paint and that there's glitter stuff in there. You never get too close to the render. So I think the AI flakes node workflow kind of worked out eventually for the look I was going for. But it would have been pretty badass to actually have glitter geometry on there. And the lips, same deal. So the lips, I built a material that is just glossy. And then I added some AI flakes in there to make it look like a kind of glitter lip gloss. Again, I painted that mask in ZBrush. So yeah, the reason why I did the layered shader thing gives me ultimate control and ultimate resolution. If I were doing it all in the texture, I wouldn't be able to dynamically update it in the scene like this. But then also everything would have had to be a map. The metalness, the actual glitter would have had to be pixels. So by doing procedurals, doing everything in the shaders, and just using these 1-to-1 masks that are really simple, I can also even use color correction nodes and levels and stuff to even refine the masks inside Arnold. So, the thing that needs the least amount of resolution is the only 1-to-1 map, and everything else is procedural. So that's why I did it that way. And that's how I made the makeup. Okay, a couple final bits just to wrap everything up. Wanted to mention that I textured the leather collar in Substance Painter. So it's the one thing that's textured outside of ZBrush. I actually spent a little bit of time and I made a leather smart material just out of, spare parts from Substance. So it was 100% procedural type of thing. I applied it to the collar, again, automatically unwrapped it, and then I polished it, tweaked the attributes so that it fit. And then I exported that, and that's what I used to texture the leather collar around her neck. The tattoo was a mixture of a pattern that I whipped up in Photoshop, and I applied that in ZBrush to get started. And then I polished that all up just by normal painting brushes in ZBrush. And then I kind of finished it off and made it a little bit more unique on her head. And that's how I did the tattoo. That's just mixed with the subsurface color with her skin in Arnold. And to finish it off, I added a couple more bits of jewelry, a diamond nose ring, a barbell in her ear. And then I did a quick rig so that I could pose her a little bit more. She was just way too straight. And once I had all this stuff on there, all the groom and everything, it made the most sense to just do a quick rig so I could move her head and tilt it a little bit to make the portrait a little bit more dynamic and make her feel a little bit more alive. Oh, and Keanu. So that's how I finished up this scene. Once I had everything done and I was ready to do the final renders, I updated my render settings to do more samples. I increased the resolution and then I let it run. I had 4 setups, so that was 4 images total, and the final renders took over 5 hours each. So it was the better part of a day. And when I do those kinds of long renders, I am still a little bit nervous, hoping that it'll all work out and it'll look good when it's finished. And this time I was happy with how they turned out. All right, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something and that you could take away and use in your own projects. I hope you found it entertaining and informative a little bit. I got some more things coming up, so thank you guys so much for the support you've been showing me recently. I'm glad you're enjoying the content. Thank you for the comments and suggestions on things to tackle. With some of the questions we didn't get to and some of the bigger topics, I think they're going to make for better videos down the road that are just for those topics, like displacement, rendering, and Arnold. I think we could do a video totally on skin detailing. And then I've got some other project ideas in the works. So I'm just going to try to keep this ball rolling. Let's just try to keep making stuff. So if you did like this video, please do hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.